They called him emperor, general, philosopher. But before all of that, Marcus Aurelius was something much simpler, a man trying to remain sane in a world gone mad. Rome was collapsing. The old gods were silent. The streets were filled with plague, war, and corruption. And yet, in the center of that storm, one man sat quietly at his desk at night, writing to himself words that would outlive the empire that crowned him. He wasn't writing to impress. He wasn't writing for history. He was writing to survive his own mind. His book, Meditations, is not a monument to power. It's a confession, a manual for how to stay human when everything around you becomes diseased. And if you look around today, the screens, the noise, the shallow outrage, the artificial faces, you realize that the sickness Marcus fought has returned. The empire just changed its name. To understand Marcus, you have to imagine what he saw. The man ruled over millions, commanded armies, and had access to every pleasure Rome could offer. Yet he looked at all of it, the feasts, the applause, the marble halls, and saw nothing but dust waiting for the wind. He wrote, "Soon you will have forgotten all things, and all things will have forgotten you." That was not despair. That was clarity. In an empire where men poisoned each other for power, he practiced philosophy like others practiced war. Daily, brutally, without mercy for his own illusions. Because Marcus understood something we have forgotten. The corruption of the world is not nearly as dangerous as the corruption of your own soul. The empire can rot, but if your soul stays upright, you remain free. When he said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one," it wasn't moral preaching. It was survival strategy. Rome had become a carnival of hypocrisy, much like our modern world of virtue signals, empty activism, and performance compassion. Everyone talked about justice, but few lived it. Everyone demanded reform, but no one reformed themselves. Marcus looked at that madness and realized the truth. The empire collapses from within, one unexamined mind at a time. So he made a vow to govern his mind better than he governed his empire. Every morning he would remind himself, "You will meet ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful men today." And then he would add, "They cannot harm you, for their nature is not your own." That is Stoicism, not coldness, but disciplined empathy. The ability to face ugliness without letting it infect your character. He didn't retreat from the world. He fought wars, judged men, executed laws. But every act was filtered through an inner court stricter than Rome's Senate. That's what makes meditation so powerful. It's not a set of rules. It's a training ground for the soul. Each sentence is a reminder. Remember how small you are. Remember how short life is. Remember how much of your suffering comes from opinion, not reality. These reminders were not philosophy homework. They were armor. Because Marcus knew what power does. It whispers to you that you're special, irreplaceable, above the law of mortality. And when you believe that, you rot. He forced himself daily to remember that he would die. Not to frighten himself, but to keep perspective. When you remember death, greed loses its grip, vanity loses its meaning, and time becomes sacred. Imagine this man, the emperor of the known world, writing, "Soon you will be ash, a skeleton, a name not even remembered." Most people would find that depressing, but Marcus found it freeing, because once you accept impermanence, you stop fighting the inevitable. You stop wasting energy trying to make the world fair. You stop expecting gratitude from the ungrateful. You learn to live rightly for its own sake, not for applause. That is the secret to staying human in a sick empire. Do what is right, not because it will succeed, but because it keeps your soul intact. The Stoics had a word, prohoresis. It meant your ruling faculty, the inner citadel, no empire can touch. Marcus guarded that citadel with every breath. He watched friends betray him, generals rebel, nature send plagues through the cities, and he refused to let bitterness claim him. He said, Fior, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Every obstacle was not a punishment. It was training. The empire tested his patience, his health, his faith, and he treated each trial as a teacher. That's why his calm wasn't weakness. It was power. Not the power to rule others, but the power to rule himself. Ask yourself, how often do you hand over your inner citadel to strangers? How often do you let a tweet, a headline, or a comment destroy your peace? Marcus lived surrounded by assassins, and yet he was calmer than most people scrolling through their phones. He knew that outrage is the easiest way to lose sovereignty. He didn't want to be ruled by Rome's chaos, so he learned to govern his perception. You have power over your mind, he wrote, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That line, written nearly 2,000 years ago, might be the most radical act of rebellion left in our digital empire. The decision to think for yourself. Because make no mistake, the modern world is Rome reborn. Bread and circuses have become dopamine and algorithms. Senators have become influencers. The mob has become the comment section. And emperors still exist, not on thrones, but in corporate towers and data centers. The same sickness that rotted Rome rots us now. Distraction disguised as progress. Marcus didn't have smartphones, but he had temptations of the same kind. Gossip, luxury, games, theater, excess. And he looked at them and said, "You will not own me." His meditations were his detox, his way of saying, I refuse to become a product of my environment. I will remain a product of my principles. He knew the world would not heal. That's the hard truth the Stoics accepted. The empire might always be corrupt, but you can still be clean. And that choice, to stay human amid decay, is the only victory that matters. Marcus didn't escape to a monastery. He ruled and suffered and stayed kind. He saw his own children die. He buried friends. He lost battles. But he never lost himself, because he didn't tie his peace to outcomes. He tied it to virtue. Virtue, to him, wasn't morality in the religious sense. It was alignment with reason, with nature, with reality. It was the daily act of not lying to yourself. He believed that every man has within him a divine fragment, a spark of universal reason, the logos. To live in harmony with that spark was to live in truth. To betray it by greed, hate, vanity was to fall ill. That's why he said the empire was sick, not because of its politics, but because of its souls. And isn't that true now? We think technology, wealth, and democracy will heal us, but we keep ignoring the rot inside, the envy, the emptiness, the craving for validation. Marcus would look at our world and say, "You have conquered the stars, but not yourselves." So what do? We do what he did. Simplify. Return to what cannot be corrupted. Start each day with one question. What is within my control? And when the answer is smaller than you'd like, accept it with strength, not resentment. That's how freedom begins. When you no longer expect the world to cater to your moods, when you learn to be calm even when the empire burns, when you realize that your peace is a discipline, not a gift. The Stoic doesn't run from fire. He builds his soul to endure it. Marcus would walk through the palaces and remind himself, all this will fade. The gold, the statues, the titles, all dust. And so he trained his joy on what couldn't fade. Justice, honesty, courage, temperance. 4 simple virtues, the Stoic pillars. They sound old-fashioned now, but they're what every civilization needs to stay alive. Lose them, and the empire collapses, no matter how rich it is. Our world is proof. We have infinite knowledge and 0 wisdom, infinite comfort and 0 character. The Stoic path is not trendy self-help. It's the art of re-becoming human. Being human, for Marcus, meant remembering that you are part of something larger. Nature, the cosmos, the eternal rhythm of creation and decay. You are not the center of it. You are a thread in the tapestry. When you live with that awareness, pride dissolves. You stop trying to control everything. You learn to serve the role you've been given, emperor or beggar, with grace. That's why Marcus could rule with compassion even while wielding power. He didn't see himself as master, but as servant of order. The same order that spins galaxies and decays empires. Look at the madness of today. Politics screaming, markets crashing, people drowning in information but starving for wisdom. Marcus would not be surprised. He would write, "The world is opinion. Change your opinion, and you change your world." That is the medicine for a sick empire, inner clarity. Because if every individual purified his perception, the collective sickness would aid. But instead, we amplify illusion. We call emotions truth, comfort, enlightenment, distraction, connection. Marcus's words cut through all that noise. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Simplicity as rebellion, integrity as revolution. He knew that the hardest battle is not against the world, but against your own reaction to it. You can't fix a corrupt empire overnight, but you can stop feeding it with your bitterness. You can stop letting fear dictate your choices. You can stop trading your attention, your life, for cheap stimulation. That's the Stoic rebellion. To be calm in chaos, to be decent when the crowd is cruel, to remain human when others forget what that means. Marcus called that living according to nature, not in a primitive sense, but in the sense of being true to your higher nature, the rational, compassionate part of you that refuses to be deformed by the world's sickness. Every time you pause instead of reacting, every time you forgive instead of hate, every time you choose discipline over indulgence, you are healing the empire from within. You are doing exactly what Marcus did in his tent, surrounded by soldiers and suffering, writing your own meditations, not on paper, but in action. Your life becomes the philosophy. And that's the point he wanted us to understand. Wisdom is not words, it is behavior. The emperor's book was his mirror, but your mirror is the moment you live in now. So yes, Rome fell. Every empire does. But Marcus Aurelius left behind something that doesn't. A reminder that no system, no technology, no empire can replace the power of a disciplined soul. If you keep that soul clean, the collapse of the world cannot touch you. The empire outside can be sick, but the kingdom within can remain pure. And that is the real victory. to stay human in an age that has forgotten what a human being is.